For more than 4 decades, the music world has quietly traded stories about secret love affairs between women behind the stage lights. In this dramatized narrative, inspired by those whispers, Chaka Khan often sits at the center of the speculation. It was said that many insiders believed she became one of the earliest low-key lesbian icons of the funk-soul era. With a private romantic life filled with complicated bonds, unspoken loyalties, and emotions pushed so far down they hardened. She never stood at a podium to confirm any of it, but she never fully denied it either. Then, according to people who claim to have been present during one private conversation, Chaka suddenly let slip a line that left the room frozen. "I loved 6 women," she was believed to have said, "and over time I came to hate every single one of them." If that confession was truly spoken, it wasn't just about romance. It was the first clear glimpse into a quiet battle that, people said, had been raging inside her for decades. Those 6 women she supposedly loved were also the ones who, in her eyes, made her fall too fast, ache too deeply, and finally walk away carrying jealousy, disappointment, and an almost physical resentment. Now this story turns toward that list as it begins to surface from the shadows. One October night in 1979, backstage at a music show in Chicago, a 16-year-old Whitney Houston stepped off the stage. Her soft curls framed a face that still looked more like a student than a star, eyes shy but glowing. Her voice had just made an entire room of hardened musicians fall silent. Behind the curtain, Chaka Khan stood stock still, her gaze locked on the teenager as though she were seeing something only she recognized. As Whitney walked toward the backstage area, Chaka moved in, smiled, pulled her into a hug, and whispered something that no microphone ever picked up. To everyone else, the gesture looked maternal, almost big sisterly. But according to a few people who were close enough to watch the exchange, Chaka's eyes held something deeper than simple mentorship. No one knew it then, but that quiet moment was the first step into a connection that would stretch nearly 30 years, threaded with affection, rivalry, uneasy silence, and a kind of hatred that never screamed, only simmered. At that time, Whitney was still the sheltered, carefully guarded daughter of Cissy Houston, Chaka's longtime friend and performing partner from the 1970 seconds. Cissy had begun bringing her teenage daughter on small tours, letting her sing in corners of the stage while the adults watched. Chaka reportedly started calling Whitney "baby girl" in front of everyone, the nickname slipping out so naturally that people assumed it would always be that way. Whitney was timid, mostly barefaced, wearing simple ballet flats instead of diva heels. Yet Chaka gravitated toward her. Those close to the situation later claimed that what she felt for Whitney was a mix of protectiveness and something far more consuming, a fascination that was too intense to be dismissed as mere fondness. By the early 1980 seconds, Whitney's professional career had officially begun. Chaka, already a funk soul legend, made little effort to hide how unusually close she seemed to be to the younger singer. She would find excuses to be at the same studio sessions, appearing in doorways just as Whitney walked into the booth. People remembered how often Chaka would reach out, fingers brushing through Whitney's hair, stroking her cheek, or holding her hand just a little longer than what looked casual. During a 1984 photo shoot in New York, with Whitney standing beside her mother, witnesses later recalled how Chaka slid between them at the last second, looping her arm around Whitney's shoulders and flashing a bright smile for the camera. Those who were there said the way she looked at Whitney did not feel like an aunt posing with a niece. In 1989, after divorcing her second husband and checking into rehab again for cocaine, Chaka slid into an emotional freefall. A sound engineer from Warner Brothers later claimed that she started calling Whitney constantly, searching for her voice on the other end of the line as if it were a lifeline. But by then, Whitney was quickly rising under the careful management of Clive Davis. Her image was polished, heavenly, spotless, a poster child for mainstream success. With that new image came distance. It was said that Whitney slowly began to pull away from people like Chaka, whose reputation was tangled in rumors, addiction, and a history the industry preferred to keep off camera. The gap between them, once filled with late-night calls and backstage hugs, gradually became filled with unanswered messages and rehearsals they no longer shared. The tension finally surfaced in a way no one could ignore after 1992, when Whitney recorded her version of "I'm Every Woman" for the Bodyguard soundtrack. The song had been Chaka's anthem since 1978, the record that felt like a statement of her entire being. Now it was reborn as a global hit in the hands of her younger peer. Whitney's version was so huge that, for newer audiences, the original almost faded into the background. Chaka never stormed onto a stage to declare her jealousy. She never went on camera and said Whitney had taken something from her. But, according to insiders, her anger ran deep. At a backstage party in Los Angeles late in 1992, a DJ accidentally spun Whitney's version instead of Chaka's. Witnesses said Chaka shot up from her chair, slammed her glass of hard liquor onto the table with such force that the stem snapped clean in two. She never spoke a word. She simply turned and walked out of the party before anyone could form a question. A black musician who had worked with both women later claimed that from that moment on, Chaka never spoke Whitney's name with the same softness again. The quiet admiration that had once colored her voice was replaced by something harsher, restrained, but unmistakably edged. That quiet resentment started to move into the open in subtle ways. When Chaka was invited to perform with Whitney at the 1994 Grammys, she suddenly canceled just before rehearsals. Officially, the reason was exhaustion. Unofficially, someone on the production team claimed Chaka had just found out that Whitney would be performing right after her on the broadcast. She supposedly refused to risk being overshadowed by the one person she used to hold so close. From 1995 onward, observers noticed a shift. In interviews, Whitney avoided mentioning Chaka's name altogether, even when talking about her influences. Meanwhile, Chaka, when asked which divas she admired, began praising Mary J., Blige, Toni Braxton, even Mariah Carey, but consistently left Whitney off the list. In 1999, when a reporter pushed her at a press conference asking whether she felt properly acknowledged by younger artists, Chaka answered sharply, "I've had a major impact in this industry. Not everyone needs to say my name to prove that." The line sounded like a general statement, but those who followed their story heard it as a message aimed straight at Whitney. By 2003, whatever bond remained between them seemed to fracture completely. Backstage at the BET Awards, they found themselves in the same room one last time. A dancer present that night recalled how Whitney was in mid-conversation when Chaka walked in. Whitney stopped talking, turned her face away, and the air went heavy. There was no greeting, no eye contact, no hug or polite smile offered for the sake of the cameras. A cameraman later described the atmosphere as the kind you feel when a war ended long ago, but no one ever signed the truce. A year later, while touring in Europe, Whitney reportedly confided to a close friend that Chaka was too intense and always looked at me like she wanted something. After that trip, Whitney cut off communication completely. Whatever they had shared, mentor and protege, obsession and escape, admiration and ache, collapsed into silence. When Whitney died suddenly at the Beverly Hilton Hotel in 2012, Chaka appeared on television with eyes so swollen it looked like she had been crying for hours. She spoke fiercely about how Whitney hadn't been protected, how the music industry had chewed her up and left her alone. But to many viewers, that fury didn't sound like simple grief. In their eyes, it was frustration and regret that never found a voice, anger at an industry that separated them, and perhaps at Whitney for slipping away. Some believed it was also the echo of an old resentment, too tightly wound to unravel even in death. Then, in 2023, Rolling Stone published its list of the 100 greatest singers of all time. Whitney landed at number 2. Chaka was placed at number 29. Chaka's reaction, captured on a podcast, was immediate and sharp. She called the list a disgrace, suggesting that some singers at the top had reached their positions with the right backing rather than pure talent. She implied that Whitney's rise had been powered from the start by Clive Davis's support. She went further, mocking the top-ranked names as artists who had never truly fought for their place, hinting that she had been punished for refusing to bow at the right moments. The backlash was swift. After waves of criticism, Chaka issued a public apology, blaming the outburst on having had some wine before the interview and insisting she hadn't meant to hurt anyone, especially Whitney's legacy. But apologies don't erase decades. For many who had watched the story unfold, that moment simply confirmed what they had always sensed. Whatever lay between Chaka Khan and Whitney Houston was never just mentorship or one-sided love. It was a long, quiet war over fame, power, and the hunger to be remembered. In the end, maybe Chaka did love Whitney in a way she herself never fully understood. But when that love went unanswered, it curdled into jealousy. When jealousy sat inside her for too long, it became bitterness. And when bitterness lived there for decades, what remained was hatred, silent, steady, and never truly cooled. 2. Mary J. Blige, from idol to unspoken rival. In 1992, Mary J. Blige crashed into the music scene with her debut album, What's the 411? She was raw, young, and unapologetically real, pouring the pain of city streets and broken homes into every line she sang. Her style, what would soon be called hip-hop soul, felt like a storm blowing straight through the polished R&B sound of the time. But what really turned heads wasn't just that fresh, gritty energy. It was her choice to step into the shadow of a song many believed should remain untouchable. Sweet Thing, the track forever associated with Chaka Khan since 1975. To the outside world, it was simply a cover. To Chaka, according to those close to her, it was like reaching into her chest and touching something far too intimate. That record wasn't just a hit, it was her spiritual child. And now, a new generation was daring to rewrite it. When Chaka first heard Mary's version in early 1992, people in the room later claimed she didn't smile, didn't nod, didn't offer a single word of praise. Instead, she was believed to have muttered, "Mary just butchered it." The line, sharp as broken glass, spread quietly through industry circles. A few months later, during a rehearsal in Atlanta, Mary approached her idol carefully, like a student coming to a teacher. She reportedly asked, almost shyly, if she had done the song justice. Chaka's answer landed like a slap without raising a hand. Nobody can sing anything good at 8 in the morning. On the surface, it sounded like a throwaway joke. Beneath it, the message felt much colder. You're not ready. Mary was only 21, then green, vulnerable, and a lifelong Chaka fan. To be cut down by the woman she had worshipped since childhood, and to have it happen in front of peers, was devastating. Witnesses said she forced out a tight smile, then retreated to the dressing room and broke down in tears. For some who saw that moment, it marked the beginning of a tension that would linger for years, quiet but heavy. Still, their story wasn't all frost and distance. In 2000, backstage at the BET Awards, something different was seen, something tender enough to ignite new rumors. Mary and Chaka were seated side by side in the artist section, away from the glare of the main cameras. A member of the lighting crew later recalled seeing Chaka gently stroke Mary's hair while Mary rested her head against Chaka's shoulder. The two women whispered, then burst into low, private laughter, their body language closer than what people expected from simple colleagues. Whispers spread fast. Some people claimed that what they saw didn't look like rivalry or a staged photo op. It looked like intimacy, something softer than competition, something warmer than mentorship. But whatever that moment was, it didn't last. Afterward, both women seemed to step back into silence. In interviews, when Chaka was asked which younger artists she admired, she named Erykah Badu, Jill Scott, and others, but not Mary. When Mary was asked who had shaped her the most, she cited Aretha Franklin and Gladys Knight, carefully steering around Chaka's name. They were there in each other's history, yet they never quite said it out loud. That mutual omission became its own kind of statement. By 2007, to the public eye, it looked like the tension might finally have thawed. Mary joined Chaka on the track Disrespectful for the album Funk This. The song hit hard, charted well, and went on to win them a Grammy in 2008. On stage, under the bright television lights, they hugged, smiled, and looked like true allies. Fans cheered, assuming that whatever had been broken between them had finally been repaired. Behind the scenes, a different picture was painted. Crew members would later say they had separate dressing rooms, minimal conversation, and only a few clipped exchanges before stepping on stage together. One person who worked the show summed it up bluntly: "They did it for the music, not for each other." Then, in January 2023, the simmering tension resurfaced, this time splashed across headlines. Rolling Stone published its 200 Greatest Singers of All Time list. Mary J. Blige appeared at number 25. Chaka Khan landed at number 29. For most readers, the gap of 4 places meant little. For Chaka, it reportedly felt like a public humiliation, a rearranging of the hierarchy she believed she had helped build. On a podcast, shortly after the list came out, she let loose. She joked that whoever made the ranking must be Helen Keller's grandchildren. She didn't say Mary's name out loud, but the implication was obvious. She was furious at finding herself behind her once young admirer. The comments were broadcast, replayed, clipped, and shared. The backlash was immediate. Many people felt she sounded bitter, unwilling to accept that the next generation had carved their own space beside, and sometimes above, the legends who came before them. Within days, Chaka released a public apology. She explained she had had a little wine before the interview and insisted she never meant harm. She emphasized that she still loved Mary like a little sister in the business, framing her words as clumsy, not cruel. Mary's response was the loudest kind of message: complete silence. No public clapback, no social media shade, no polite acceptance of the apology. Nothing. For insiders, that quiet refusal to engage said more than any interview ever could. What unsettles people about their story are the small, lingering details. The way Mary once rested her head on Chaka's shoulder backstage in 2000, as if seeking comfort from someone she trusted. The way, at a New York party in 2012, according to one guest, they crossed paths and didn't so much as meet each other's eyes. The way, during their Grammy performance in 2008, some viewers felt they were pushing against each other vocally, 2 forces colliding rather than melting into a true duet. Someone who had worked with both women once described them with a single image: "They're like 2 lionesses. They might hunt in the same territory, but they'll never share the kill." It was a brutal metaphor, but one that captured the uneasy mix of admiration, competition, and unspoken hurt between them. Because, at its core, the friction between Chaka and Mary was never just about charts or vocal runs. It was 2 towering personalities from 2 different eras, both black women carrying trauma and triumph in their voices. One embodied rebellious funk and freewheeling soul. The other was the sound of the streets, filtered through hip-hop, survival stories wrapped in melody. They both sang about pain, but they framed it differently. And maybe it was that reflection, seeing a younger version of your own wounds in someone else's performance, that made it impossible to ever be truly at peace. To Mary, Chaka may have always been the untouchable idol who turned around and wounded her in the very moment she was reaching out for approval. To Chaka, Mary may have been the heir apparent, the next wave, but also the young singer who dared to put her hands on a sacred song and then dared to be ranked above her decades later. If there was ever genuine affection between them, something that flickered in private moments away from cameras and microphones, it was never fully claimed in public. What remains instead is a collage of sidelong glances, half-joking remarks with a sting beneath them, and apologies that drifted into the air unanswered. In the end, no one on the outside can say with certainty whether they were ever anything more than professional peers tangled in the same narrative. But one thing seems clear. Between Chaka Khan and Mary J. Blige, it was never just about the music. There was pride, there was rivalry, and there were wounds that time, fame, and trophies never completely healed. 3. Patti LaBelle, 2 divas who avoid eye contact. They are legends. 2 voices that lit fires in the hearts of black audiences across generations. One, the Queen of Funk, with wild curls, and a voice that sounded like it had been torn from a storm. The other, the Empress of power ballads and gospel, whose soaring high notes could rattle a ceiling. Chaka Khan and Patti LaBelle. On paper, they look inseparable in the grand mural of black divas from the 1,970 seconds through the 2000s. But in reality, as fans slowly began to notice, Theirs is a story of parallel lines, two names rarely seen side by side. And that absence, that deliberate space between them, is exactly what gives their connection such a strangely haunting edge. In early 1995, at a charity concert in New York, both Chaka and Patti were listed on the same bill. Organizers, sensing a historic moment, originally planned a brief duet for the finale, a symbolic merging of two eras, two titans on one stage. But according to a musician from the show's orchestra, everything changed when Chaka heard about the plan. She reportedly requested an immediate adjustment. She would only perform after Patti had finished, and she would not share the stage with her. The musician later claimed that Chaka never gave a formal reason, just a cutting line delivered almost under her breath. "I don't share the stage with anyone who screams over 5 notes at a time." That quote was never captured in an official interview, never printed in any verified transcript. But the phrase took on a life of its own, circulating quietly among black performers and crew members. From it grew a mocking label over singing diva, and the name most often attached to it in private conversations was Patti LaBelle. Throughout the 1992 and early 2000s, both women were constant presences at events honoring black women in music. BET Honors, Essence Festival, VH1 Divas Live. They shared the same nights, the same backstage corridors, the same applause, but fans who paid attention started to notice a pattern. They were always separated in group photos, rarely, if ever, seen standing side by side. When lineups were arranged, they seemed to be placed at opposite ends. During VH1 Divas 2004, when all the performers came together for the final bow, Patti stood between Whitney Houston and Ashanti. Chaka, meanwhile, lingered off to the side, next to Natalie Cole. A cameraman later claimed that when the lights dipped and the broadcast ended, he watched closely. Even without the pressure of a live audience, Chaka and Patti never exchanged so much as a glance, no nod of recognition, no quick hug for old time's sake. Just a mutual, disciplined avoidance. Rumors thickened. On a forum dedicated to soul and R&B in 2006, someone who said they worked on BET Award productions claimed they had once overheard Chaka dismiss Patti as a singer for the church, not the soul. In other words, loud, controlled, but missing the raw instinct Chaka prized above all else. To Chaka, music was supposed to be blood and impulse, not precision and polish. Her freewheeling, improvisational style clashed sharply with Patti's laser-accurate riffs and disciplined high notes. Maybe, some speculated, that's why in Chaka's eyes, Patti came off more like performance than feeling. But none of this was ever confirmed by either woman. All anyone had were fragments, overheard lines, and long stretches of silence. For years, it remained gossip until early 2025, when a YouTube video titled "Artists Chaka Khan Allegedly Hates the Most" sparked a fierce online debate. Included in the video was a grainy behind-the-scenes clip from an unidentified rehearsal. In it, Chaka could be heard murmuring, "She makes every damn song sound like the national anthem." No name was mentioned, but the video's title strongly suggested she was talking about Patti LaBelle. The clip went viral. Fans argued in the comments, dissecting every syllable, every expression. Some insisted it was taken out of context. Others claimed it finally confirmed what had long been suspected, that something unresolved lay between the two divas, something that had never been addressed out loud. In more mainstream interviews, both women seemed to step carefully around each other's existence. On The View in 2010, when Patti was asked which divas she admired most, she replied, "Aretha's the matriarch. Gladys Knight taught me a lot, and Whitney is my heart." She did not mention Chaka. Meanwhile, in a 2018 podcast, when Chaka was asked to describe Patti LaBelle in one word, she paused for a long moment and said, "Precise. Not passionate. Not soulful. Just precise, a word that, on the surface, reads like a compliment, but lands with a kind of cool, clinical distance. Yet, despite all the rumors and the frosty non-acknowledgement, insiders insist there was a time when they were far closer than anyone would guess. Industry veterans say that in the early 1980 seconds, Chaka and Patti shared more than just stages and award shows. A producer, who once worked on an unreleased project allegedly involving both women, claimed they had several private dinners in Los Angeles in 1981 while recording at the same studio complex. The project itself was eventually shelved without explanation. Not long after, there were no more dinners, no more whispered plans, no more invitations to collaborate. Years later, an anonymous blogger on a retro soul site revisited the story, writing, "I'm not sure they were ever in love, but they were clearly close. Then they drifted apart in a way that felt very personal. No one confirmed it. No one directly denied it. The timeline simply developed a blank space where something important might have happened." What baffles many fans is this: both women have careers that stretch over half a century. Both are honored as living monuments to black music. Yet there has never been a true duet, no joint album, no iconic magazine cover featuring the two of them arm in arm. Their dynamic isn't openly hostile. There are no public shouting matches, no direct insults on record. But it also isn't warm. It feels like a carefully maintained distance, a professional courtesy that, in this case, seems to be covering something closer to contempt. Longtime observers have noticed that Chaka has rarely seemed comfortable around artists with carefully choreographed, highly formal performance styles. Patti, with her gowns, her polished stagecraft, her church-rooted delivery, embodies that formality completely. Next to her, Chaka's raw edges and unpredictable fire can look almost out of place. Look closely, and the question becomes unavoidable. Are they too different to stand comfortably beside each other? Or are they too similar in their pride, too unwilling to bend, for either woman to risk taking the first step toward real reconciliation? In the story of black music, there are legendary pairings that defined eras: Aretha and Whitney, Mary and Chaka, Tina and Patti. But when people reach for proof of Chaka Khan and Patti LaBelle together, all they can really find are fragments. Cold glances caught in the background of old footage, exits taken through different doors backstage, seating charts built to keep them apart, and a silence that has stretched over 40 years. 4. Joni Mitchell, the friend she once shared a home with. Almost no one would have predicted that the person said to haunt Chaka Khan the most over the decades wouldn't be a fellow black diva, but a white folk icon from Canada, Joni Mitchell. And if the rumors are even half true, what lay between them wasn't just friendship, it was a quiet, secret connection that never dared to fully name itself. In the spring of 1975, inside a small recording studio in Chicago, Chaka Khan was seen standing alone, facing a battered cassette player. From its small speakers floated "Help Me" by Joni Mitchell. The sound was thin, but the emotion slipped into every corner of the room. Joni's voice, light and fragile, drifted through the air like mist, settling into all the lonely spaces where anger usually lived. As the chorus rose, an assistant walked in and froze. According to that account, Chaka stood with her eyes closed, not sobbing, not visibly falling apart, but there was a look on her face like something inside her had shattered and been set free at the same time. That day, Rufus had just gone through a major blow-up, and their recording contract was reportedly hanging by a thread. Chaka didn't give a speech or explain herself. She simply murmured, "She's the light that pulled me out of the dark." From then on, Joni Mitchell became a strange kind of spiritual reference point in Chaka's inner world. She didn't call Joni a friend in the usual way. She called her a muse, a free angel, a dream that couldn't be pinned down. Between 1975 and 1978. While Rufus battled infighting and Chaka clashed with controlling male producers, people close to her said it was Joni's music that kept a small part of her intact. She was believed to hum "Both Sides Now" under her breath after backstage arguments, like a private ritual. According to a former bandmate who claimed to have seen her journal, she once wrote, "Joni doesn't know who I am, but I've loved that voice the way someone loves a soul they've never touched." Then fate twisted the story in a way no one could have scripted. Around 1993, Chaka Khan moved to Laurel Canyon, the quiet hillside above Hollywood that had once been a sanctuary for 1960 Seconds artists. Joni Mitchell lived there too. And soon, according to several housekeepers and staffers in the neighborhood, Chaka began appearing at Joni's house not as a casual drop-in, but as a regular presence. It was said that several times a week, the two women sat together listening to records, drinking white wine, talking late into the night. One former staff member even claimed that on some nights, Chaka simply stayed over, leaving only after the sky began to lighten. No one outside those walls knows exactly what happened in that house. But from 1993 to 1995, something about Chaka shifted. Her public appearances dropped noticeably. Invitations were declined. Sessions were postponed. A producer who tried to bring her into a new project during that stretch recalled that she turned it down with a simple, puzzling line: "I'm learning how to be quiet." For a woman known to ignite any room she entered, that kind of quiet sounded like a transformation, and some believed Joni was the one who steadied her. Then, in 2002, the surface of their story cracked. In a Canadian arts magazine interview, Joni Mitchell was asked about Chaka Khan. According to a blog that reposted the conversation, Joni smiled slightly and said, "Chaka is a storm. When she walks into your life, everything changes color, but you have to know when to step back." One sentence, but it landed like a warning and a wound at the same time. After that, observers noticed that Chaka seemed to erase Joni from her public vocabulary. For more than 6 years, she did not bring up Joni's name in interviews. On a 2005 talk show, when Chaka was asked about the women who had inspired her the most, she praised Nina Simone, Aretha Franklin, even Janis Joplin. Joni was conspicuously absent. A senior journalist from Jet magazine reportedly followed up in a later interview, pushing the question directly: "What about Joni?" Chaka's answer was short and flat: "She's doing fine." No warmth, no elaboration, just a closed door in 4 words. From 2009 to 2012, that avoidance only grew more visible. Chaka spoke openly and emotionally about Whitney Houston, Stevie Wonder, and Prince. She cried on camera for some of them, revisited memories in detail, and made sure the world knew what they had meant to her. But when the topic leaned toward Joni Mitchell, once described as her spiritual muse, there was nothing. No stories, no shout-outs, just silence. On fan forums like Chaka-focused sites and Mitchell fan pages, people whispered theories. They said something had broken, that there was a wound too personal to be paraded in public. One Tumblr blogger, obsessed with both women's discographies, wrote, "They were close in a way that didn't need a label." Then one of them stepped away, and the other never forgave it. Maybe that wound stayed buried until the summer of 2023. In an Interview magazine piece, Chaka unexpectedly brought up Joni Mitchell again. This time, her tone wasn't fiery or nostalgic. It was measured, almost eerily calm. "Joni understood me better than anyone," she said, "but we've learned how to stay silent together." The statement felt oddly gentle and cold at once, the sound of a door closing very slowly. Chaka went on, "We both grew from that connection, and now we respect each other from a safe distance." For fans who had followed the shadows of their story for years, that phrase, "respect from a safe distance," hit like a confession wrapped in careful wording. They knew that when someone like Chaka Khan, a woman who had raged about unfair rankings and wept for friends lost too soon, chose that particular language, it meant the history ran deep, and very painful. From that point on, people started to look back at every trace of Chaka and Joni through a different lens. The late-night visits in Laurel Canyon, the suddenly sparse public appearances, the clipped answers, the years of total silence. No one outside their circle can say for certain whether they were ever truly in love. What can be pieced together, though, is that they were close enough, for long enough, and private enough that something undeniable formed between them. They shared nights in the same home, conversations no one else heard, and a bond that ended not in chaos, but in the kind of distance people create when they know they've gone as far as they can without losing themselves. In the archive of Chaka Khan's friendships, partnerships, and hidden soul ties, this may be the one story with almost no visible evidence, no glossy photos, no live duets, no official collaborations to point to. Just scattered fragments, half-remembered glances, and whispered accounts that suggest something very real once happened here, something that was never meant to be given a name. 5. Diana Ross, the glance that was never returned. Of all the names linked to Chaka Khan in this whispered archive, the one said to leave her the most conflicted was Diana Ross, and almost no one would have guessed that the deepest wound Chaka ever carried, at least in this telling, didn't come from an explosive scandal, but from a single look that was never truly given back. In the 1,970 seconds, Diana Ross was everything Chaka hadn't yet reached. She wore the Motown crown, commanded movie screens, turned every red carpet into a runway. Her hair, makeup, and gowns were calibrated to perfection, shimmering under cameras that adored her. Chaka, by contrast, was street heat and funk fire, wild, loud, and almost impossible to tame. But according to people who claim to have heard her speak freely, Chaka never wanted to be Diana. During one hazy, private backstage conversation, she was believed to have confessed, "I didn't want to be her. I just wanted to know what it felt like to be near her." Crew members from that era remember one particular night. After an awards show in 1980, Diana Ross walked through 3 long corridors of the Hyatt Regency Hotel, martini in hand, headed toward her suite. Chaka followed at a distance, silent, almost like a shadow. When Diana finally turned around near the elevators, she found Chaka standing there alone. For nearly 20 seconds, according to one witness, they just stared at each other. No small talk, no compliment, no giggle or embrace. Then Diana turned and walked away. That night, Chaka never returned to her hotel room. Where she went, no one seems to know. But those who watched her from afar said she moved like someone who had just slammed into an invisible wall. In the early 1,980 seconds, rumors in the industry suggested that for a brief window between 1,981 and 1,982, Chaka and Diana were far closer than the public ever realized. They were reportedly seen leaving the same after-party just minutes apart. A former limo driver claimed he drove Chaka to Diana's mansion 3 nights in a row. No appointments, no official meetings scheduled. Each time, no one answered the intercom. Each time, Chaka stayed in the car and waited, sometimes for almost an hour, then left without a word. During her 1983 tour, Chaka performed a stripped-down version of "Touch Me in the Morning," one of Diana's signature songs. The lights were dim, the arrangement bare, just a lonely keyboard under her voice. There is no official footage, no professional recording. But people who were in the audience that night swear the way Chaka sang it didn't feel like a tribute. It felt like a message aimed at exactly one person. Then, as with so many of these stories, something cracked quietly and never mended. In 1994, a tribute concert was planned to honor Black divas. According to people close to the event, organizers reached out to Diana Ross to share the stage with Chaka for a special segment, but Diana's team declined. No dramatic excuse, just a short, carefully worded note. "We want Diana's image to remain the centerpiece." For Chaka, that sentence landed like a knife. She was someone who had spent years in the wings, watching Diana command the spotlight, studying every tilt of her head and flick of her wrist. The message seemed to say there was room only for one centerpiece, and it wasn't her. After that, observers noticed a shift that felt almost like erasure. Chaka stopped mentioning Diana at tributes and award shows, even when other legends' names flowed freely from her lips. But behind the scenes, in the dark corners of rehearsals and green rooms, her guard sometimes slipped. At one BET Awards backstage conversation, a crew member claimed to overhear Chaka whisper to an assistant, "I don't know if I loved her or wanted to be her, but either way, it doesn't matter now." It sounded less like bitterness and more like someone closing a chapter they'd never been allowed to write. From that point on, there was no open feud between them, no public sparring, no direct shots fired in interviews. Instead, it was as if they had quietly agreed to wipe each other off the map. No joint performances, no casual photos, no warm recollections of the good old days. Just 2 careers unfolding on parallel tracks, deliberately never touching. In 2024, at the Fool in Love Festival, both names appeared on the same lineup. Diana Ross was booked on the main stage at 9 p.m. Chaka Khan was scheduled for a side stage at 7:15. Fans flooded both sets, some hoping that after decades of distance, there might finally be a surprise moment, a shared song, a nod, even just a hand held for a brief bow. It never came. After her set, Chaka reportedly left the venue quickly, hoodie pulled low, dodging cameras and slipping out before the night's climax. By the time Diana walked onto the main stage, Chaka was already gone. Some people insist they were together once, if only for a fleeting moment in the shadows. Others argue it was always one-sided, that Chaka's feelings, whatever they were, never found a reflection in Diana's gaze. And when that longing went unacknowledged long enough, it curdled into something darker, a quiet contempt for everything Diana seemed to represent, the glamour, the emotional distance, the refusal to ever look back. There were no leaked photos of kisses, no exposed letters, no text messages to dissect, just scattered moments stretched across 40 years in which two women who could have set any stage on fire together instead chose to stand at opposite ends of the frame, just beyond each other's light. A fan who attended the 2024 festival summed it up in a comment that spread quickly online. If Chaka's eyes once searched for Diana, then Diana's answer was pure silence. And that's the coldest goodbye you can give someone who adored you. 6. Syleena Johnson, the protégé who slept in the studio, then vanished from her story. Syleena Johnson, daughter of soul singer Syl Johnson, came into the business with a gritty Southern soul tone that felt like it was born to carry the legacy of women like Aretha Franklin and Chaka Khan. But maybe that was the problem. She didn't just follow in their footsteps. She carried their shadows so closely that for some, it became uncomfortable to watch. She didn't enter Chaka's orbit as just another young singer. She appeared as a mirror, someone who moved Chaka, but also unsettled her on a level that went beyond music. In the summer of 2003, during a private showcase in Chicago, 6-year-old Syleena stepped into a studio with bright, hopeful eyes and a demo that was still just raw piano and voice. Waiting inside, cigarette in hand but unlit, was Chaka Khan, the funk soul legend Syleena had idolized her entire life. Now, at last, Chaka was there to listen. Witnesses said that the moment Syleena began to sing, Chaka's body changed. She tilted her head, her lips curled not into the easy smile of approval people expected, but into something far more complicated. It looked like surprise, delight, and a flicker of something dangerous, longing. After that session, Syleena didn't go home. According to her assistant, she texted, "I'm staying tonight. We talked about music all night." What sounded like an artistic bond quickly deepened. The studio manager later claimed he saw them leave close to 3 a.m. Hands brushing, fingers briefly laced, not an accident, not the random touch of two colleagues. From mid-2003 to the end of 2004, Syleena Johnson was rarely seen far from Chaka's side. They appeared together at small events in Atlanta, ducked into private dinners at a hidden jazz spot in New Orleans, and, according to one musician who swore he saw it himself, there were at least 2 nights when they slipped out of after-parties and never came back. Backstage whispers grew louder. Some people said Chaka was grooming a successor. Others muttered that this was more than mentorship, that maybe the protégé had crossed a line into something more intimate. Chaka never addressed the speculation. Syleena never confirmed it. But the air around them crackled whenever they walked into a room together. The turning point came in the fall of 2005. A test session for a soul collaboration project featuring a new generation of female artists was held in New York. Chaka and Syleena were paired to record background harmonies, supposedly a perfect match. According to a sound engineer who was there, during one take Syleena's voice accidentally cut through the mix louder than intended. It wasn't meant to be a lead, but it sounded like one. Chaka stopped, pulled off her headphones, threw them onto the table, and said, "This little girl thinks she's replacing somebody." What followed happened behind a closed studio door, but a rough, low-quality recording leaked onto an underground blog a few weeks later and shot through the R&B community like electricity. In the clip, the audio is distorted, but some of the words are chillingly clear. A woman believed to be Syleena shouts, "I admire you, but you make young women feel like trash." And a colder voice, attributed to Chaka, answers, No one made you come close. Don't confuse inspiration with a seat at the table. They never worked together again. No reconciliations, no public performance to patch the wound. Just a hard stop. From 2006 onward, Syleena Johnson seemed to scrub Chaka's name from her public vocabulary. In interviews, she continued to praise Aretha Franklin, Mary J., Blige, Jill Scott, women whose music had shaped her. But when Chaka's name came up, she sidestepped it. Or the interviewers had already learned not to ask. Chaka, for her part, often went out of her way to publicly support younger singers, endorsing their talent, celebrating their work. But Syleena's releases, her albums, even her television appearances, passed without so much as a mention. It was as if the woman who once slept in the studio and walked out beside her at 3 a.m. had been written out of the script completely. Like many connections where intense emotions are never fully named, their ending didn't come with a scandalous headline or a dramatic confrontation on camera. It arrived quietly, in the form of absence, a growing coldness rising from unfinished tracks, shared rooms they would never enter together again, and a silence both women chose not to break. Maybe that's what keeps people coming back to this story. It began like a shimmering dream, a legend reaching down to pull up the next generation. It turned, in the shadows, into something more complicated. Admiration tangled with desire, fear of being replaced, clashing with the urge to pass the torch. And then it shattered, leaving only rumors and a space where music was supposed to be. 6 women. 6 relationships that were never officially named as love stories, but never fully denied either. From trembling glances backstage to vanishing acts in green rooms. 1, Chaka once called baby. 1, she followed down hotel corridors just to be near. 1, she was believed to have shared long, quiet nights with in Laurel Canyon. Another she may have tried to shape, only to push her away when she came too close. Admiration curdled into jealousy, jealousy hardened into bitterness. Bitterness, left alone for years, turned into something that looked a lot like hatred, calm on the surface, relentless underneath. No one knows how many of Chaka's songs were truly written for a woman she never dared to name out loud. No one outside her inner circle can say which of these 6, if any, was the real one. The person who marked her so deeply that the echoes still show up in her voice. So now, the question turns to you. In this tangled web of whispered glances, late-night studio sessions, and silent feuds, who do you think mattered most in Chaka's hidden history? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more of these untold chapters from black music's shadowed corners, don't forget to hit follow.